Hi! Welcome to this part of my review featuring the Heroes and Hardships core rulebook. This is the early access version. If you haven't seen the other parts of my review featuring this universal RPG system, please check out the playlist in the description below. You will also find links to the Kickstarter that is ongoing and it is in its stretch goals. You are going to find links to the website, to the Tetsubo section of the website. Tetsubo is an upcoming setting inspired by Japan's Sengoku era. You will also find links to the Discord and to my reviews of the Quickstart guide and the Wallace campaign setting, based on the life and exploits of William Wallace. So please check it out. Now let's continue. This time we are going to talk about the battlefield and hazards. Let's start with the battlefield. Combat can occur anytime and anywhere, from country roads, taverns, to cozy homes, and dangerous dungeons. Danger always lurks just ahead. Heroes and Hardships suggests a hexagonal grid for combat. This allows a more realistic experience that gives more options for players within the Heroes and Hardships rule set. Each object has a size. In most cases, it is not important to know the size of the object, but there are times when it is necessary. Most humanoids have a size of 1. This is the default size for any creature. Creatures that are size 1 occupy 1 hex or unit. Size affects different factors in combat. For example, post-roll damage using the hand-to-hand skill or any melee skill are multiplied by the size of the character. This is applied before any adjustments to your weapon damage, such as abilities like Lethal Weapon. You also lower the base defense of a character against attacks from characters with a smaller size. Lower the base defense by 5, multiplying the power level per size level of difference to a minimum of 0. You also increase the base defense of a character against attacks from characters with a larger size. Increase the base defense by 5, multiplying the power level per size level of difference. Large creatures find stealth difficult to their large frame. For each size greater than 1, apply 1 hardship to any stealth skill checks. And creatures with a smaller size do -5 post-roll modifiers to a minimum of 0 on slashing, piercing, or bludgeoning aspects on melee attacks against larger size creatures per size level of difference. When it comes to hexes, it is important to know how size affects how many hexes the object occupies. Size 1 always occupies a single hex. Sizes larger than 1 may increase the hexes they occupy. The Game Master may occupy a number of hexes equal to the size score of the character. This can be arranged in any manner the Game Master thinks best, so long as all hexes are contiguous. Let's talk about engagement. This is a term used primarily in melee combat. Engagement describes who can immediately attack and defend. There are 2 types of combatants involved in engagement. There are the engaged attacker and the engaged defender. An engaged attacker is engaged with any character they can reach with a melee weapon currently in hand. An engaged defender is engaged with any character that can reach them. It is possible and likely to be both an engaged attacker and engaged defender. An engaged defender can be engaged by up to 6 other characters. An engaged attacker cannot engage through another character, friendly or not. An engaged attacker must have an unobstructed path to the defender. Moving while you are an engaged defender is a dangerous proposition. This is subject to the opportunity attack action from any character that is an engaged attacker. If an opportunity attack action is made, the engaged defender cannot use any defensive actions. Instead, use their base defense as if they are helpless. To prevent opportunity attacks, an engaged defender can use certain actions to protect themselves while moving. There are 2 different types of distance units that can be used in Heroes and Hardships, depending on the level of tactical combat desired. Heroes and Hardships uses a hex grid for tactical combat, of course. When any number is applied for movement or range, the ratio of movement is 1 per hex or unit to 1 speed. Although there are guidelines here to play without using a hex grid. Movement may be tied to either units, which is a generic term of distance left up to the Game Master, or hexes. When a character moves, count the number of hexes or units, and move accordingly. Skills can be used instead of movement where needed. Climbing, swimming, and others should often require a skill check when the character does not possess that mode of movement. You must use an action to move. Different actions allow you to move in certain ways. There are 4 modes of normal movement. These modes are typically granted by ancestry traits or other special methods. You have walk, fly, burrow, and swim. All creatures are assumed to have the walk mode of movement, unless they have a flaw that states otherwise. Each character or object has a speed rating. Most speed ratings are 1. When moving, the character typically moves their speed rating per action point spent, but this depends directly on the action used. Speed scores greater than 1 multiply the action's rate of movement per action point. Let's talk about unarmed attacks. These use the hand-to-hand skill. Unarmed strikes have no post-roll modifiers as damage as most weapons do. Unarmed combat typically does not do lethal damage. Non-lethal attacks cause wound hardships, but do not track wounds as normal. Only make falter rolls with non-lethal unarmed attacks instead of death rolls. Unarmed attacks have the one-handed trait and grapple quality. A player may wish to move their character through an occupied space. When moving through a friendly hex or occupied space, increase the movement cost by 1 action point. In order to move through a hex or space occupied by an enemy, the character moving must make a challenging acrobatics skill check. If they fail, they must stop on their current hex or space and finish their action immediately. The skill check does not cost any additional action points to perform. Let's talk about opportunity attacks. Moving through an enemy hex or occupied space will immediately allow the character to make an opportunity attack, while the moving character is engaged. To further clarify, this occurs when moving any number of units or hexes while the mover is engaged. Engaged attackers may only trigger an opportunity attack once per the engaged defender's movement. However, an engaged attacker may make the attack anytime while the defender uses a movement action and is engaged. Characters may not stop in a space that is occupied by another character unless grappling. They must continue to an unoccupied space. If you cannot complete the movement through an occupied space, either due to a lack of action points or having no valid hexes in which you can stop, you may not move through the occupied space at all. Movement can be impacted by certain environments. This could be thick brush, high winds, slick surfaces, and such. Movement impediments are cumulative. This means if multiple sources apply movement impediments, add the movement impediment ranks and use the penalty of the total ranks. There are also sensory impediments, which are conditions that lower the senses of characters in a scene. This could be darkness, extreme brightness, fog, etc. Sensory impediments typically impact only one of the 5 senses: hearing, sight, touch, taste, or smell. Sensory impediments are cumulative as well. This means if multiple sources apply sensory impediments, add the sensory impediment ranks and use the penalty of the total ranks. When it comes to ambush and surprise, in order to ambush another group of individuals, those attempting the maneuver must make an opposed stealth skill check against the defender's perception skill check. Use group skill checks where necessary. A failed ambush represents a waste of time, so add 1 action point to those that fail the ambush, ensuring the defenders act first, that is, they take longer to act. Succeeding on an ambush grants a massive advantage to the ambushers. Add 1 action point to the defenders if they fail and give 1 hardship to their initiative rolls. When it comes to lying prone, anytime a character is said to be prone, they are off their feet and on the ground. Prone characters that are aware and conscious take 2 hardships to any defensive action. Prone characters using an offensive action with a melee action also take 2 hardships. Prone characters gain 2 levels of cover impediments against ranged attacks. Prone characters can stand up by using the change posture action. Sometimes a character may want to target a space or object that is not a character. This would include throwing a grenade to a certain hex or unit, or perhaps a door, stationary vehicle, etc. Always target the hex or unit that the object belongs in, or simply the hex or unit itself. Objects never have a base defense and cannot make defensive actions. This means the difficulty is solely based on ranged dice. Their base defense is 0. If the thrown item would impact a character in any way, apply base defense as well as ranged dice as usual. This may create different base defense values per character. This is most commonly seen when being targeted by something with the explode quality. When it comes to scatter, it is sometimes useful to know where a weapon or ammunition lands. This is particularly true for weapons with the thrown and explosive qualities. In most other cases, thrown weapons that miss are considered to be in the hex or unit where they were aimed regardless of whether the attack was successful or not. Other ranged attacks ricochet away, bury themselves into the ground, or plunge into nearby inanimate objects. When it comes to grappling, a combatant can use the grapple action to initiate a grapple. There are only 2 participants in a grapple. They are the offensive grappler and the defensive grappler. A character may be the defensive grappler in more than one grapple. However, a character typically can only be part of one grapple as the offensive grappler. There are a few nuances when it comes to grappling. While in a grapple, both offensive and defensive grapplers cannot use an action to move unless that action specifically allows it. Any action that provokes movement immediately fails. Any grappler that does not defend an attack while in a grapple uses their base defense as normal. The offensive grappler is considered grappling on subsequent turns unless the grapple is broken or released. The offensive grappler may let go of their grapple as a free action with no action point cost. The offensive grappler that uses offensive actions that target the defensive grappler and require a skill check gain a bonus so long as they use the hand-to-hand or short blades skill. If any other skill is used, the offensive grappler suffers 1 hardship instead. If the offensive grappler uses an offensive or defensive action against a target that is not the defensive grappler, the grapple automatically ends as the offensive grappler is forced to release the grip. Defensive grapplers may use the grapple action to change from the defensive grappler to the offensive grappler position. The offensive grappler may use any defensive action as usual. If the defensive grappler's grapple action is successful, the defensive grappler becomes the offensive grappler and may end the grapple immediately by letting go as a free action. Defensive grapplers that are not adjacent to offensive grapplers and do not have reach cannot become the offensive grappler. The grapple immediately ends instead. Defensive grapplers may use offensive actions and they may attack any adjacent target. Those that require a skill check take 2 hardships. The defensive grappler cannot make defensive actions against any character that is not the offensive grappler. They defend with their base defense only. The defensive grappler may make defensive actions against the offensive grappler, so long as they use the hand-to-hand or short blades skill. If not, they take 1 hardship when attempting to do so. And defensive grapplers that are grappled by a weapon that is not actively controlled, such as a net, make an opposed skill check against the previous base attack value of the weapon's attack in order to break free. It is important to note that there are optional rules and variants to simplify combat. There is even an optional rule to handle morale. Now, concerning mounted combat, when a character is atop a mount, any mount, they are considered mounted. Mounted characters gain certain bonuses and drawbacks, so this is excellent for riding horses, dragons, rhinoceros, whatever you can imagine in your role-playing game. Characters must be at least 1 size score less than their mount. Characters gain all benefits and drawbacks of the size score of their mount. Attacks can be made against the rider or mount. If the mount takes a wound, the rider must make a hard ride skill check or be thrown from the mount. If the mount dies, the rider is automatically thrown. Those thrown from the mount take a hazard with a rank equal to the size of the mount as they fall to the ground. This hazard causes bludgeoning damage. Increase the rank by 1 if the mount dies. Fallen riders are prone in a free hex adjacent to the mount, determined by the game master. Either the mount or rider acts on the character's turn, not both. When either act, move both up the combat track. Most mounts can only use the move, run, or standard attack actions. Other actions are used by the rider. Riders may only use mounted, one-handed, or adaptable weapons while under mount. Let's talk about hazards. Hazards cause damage to a character, but are not controlled by a skill check. However, sometimes a skill check can cause hazards to begin. These skill checks do not factor into the damage caused. Hazards have a rank from 1 to 10. The hazard rank makes up the kept dice of the dice pool. For the rolled dice, add the hazard effect rank and the power level of the game. These are called hazard dice, and they explode as normal. Each effect also has post-roll modifiers, which are added to the damage if the hazard is successful. Hazards may be defended by a skill check or either base defense, mental defense, magic defense, etc. Each type of hazard describes what skill check or defense to use. If the total of the hazard dice is equal to or greater than the defense, the hazard succeeds. Determine the post-roll modifier by taking the hazard rank and adding the power level of the game. The game master determines the aspect of the post-roll modifier. The hit location of hazards is considered torso unless specified otherwise, for example a bear trap. Add all relevant post-roll modifiers such as damage and applicable armor to base attack value of the hazard dice. Compare the total success value to the defender's relevant characteristic, such as wound level, terror level, and such. Some hazards are persistent. Damage occurs over time, and each time damage occurs, it happens independently of previous damage. Examples of persistent hazards are poison, fire, electricity, etc. Now, the book includes a few example hazards, but you have all of the information needed to create an infinity of hazards. So this book includes bludgeon traps, poison darts, pitfalls, drowning, fear traps, saw traps, terror traps, suffocation traps, and many others. This concludes this part of the review. In the next part we are going to talk about vehicles. I like how every aspect of combat in this game is tied directly to the advantages or hardships that could result from your choices in battle. I also like that there are some rules to simplify things or to make them as complex as you want them to be. And remember, this is a complete rulebook. You can create anything from hazards to vehicles to characters, elements of the battlefield. Anything can be created using this rulebook. Any additional material related to heroes and hardships that could come out in the future is only going to be a way to save your time when building things. And this is excellent. Thank you for watching this part of the review, and thank you for your likes and your comments. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that are going the extra mile to support the channel. If anyone else wishes to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.